Now, a big part of your story involves Howard Stern. Where did you first hear about Howard? I mean, was he on the airwaves in the areas you lived back then?
So I grew up going to school in the West Coast. We moved to LA, so I didn't get Howard as early as other people on the West Coast. What I got at first was his old TV show, the Channel 9 show. And I started watching his Channel 9 show instead of Saturday Night Live because a lot of his sketches had those organic, moments where they leaned into whatever direction the bit was, or somebody on staff became the bit, in that moment. And that organic nature of it, I loved. So I think it was, I would say early 90, like 1990, I started watching the Channel 9 show. And then they just syndicated him the next few months later in LA. And I started watching, and I've told somebody the story, but I remember like just being hooked on his show immediately. And I try to get my dad in on it, and he's driving me to school one morning. And I go, Dad, you got to listen to this show. And I put it on the radio. And he's interviewing a guy who made a bet that if they put up 3 different types of dog poop, he could identify what breed of dog the dog poop was from. And if he was wrong, he would eat the dog poop on the air. And this guy's explaining the bit. And my dad just looks at me. He's my dad's old Israeli guy. He just looks at me and he just goes, "What a fantastic program. This is great. And you want to be on this show? Fantastic." He was horrified. He was never a huge fan until Howard hired me. Then he became a big fan.
So you initially moved to, I think, Vegas, and I think that kind of
Yeah.
ties into your story with the Stern Show. What brought you to Vegas?
I was living with some friends in Arizona, and they stopped working and stopped paying rent. So I said, why don't I do that to my parents instead of being the parents for these guys? And I moved back in with my folks, not knowing what I wanted to do. I said, maybe I'll get a job dealing in the casinos and do that. And, but comedy was always something that I dreamt of doing, just didn't have the guts to try it.
When you
And
did try it, I mean, do you
yeah.
remember what your first stand-up set felt like? I mean, was it a good experience or bad? Was it scary?
Oh, it was one of the worst moments of my life. And they're kind of supposed to go that way. That's the thing with stand up, is it weeds out the people who aren't cut for it right out the gate. Cause that first time, there's this many people that kill it their first time. Everybody else, usually you're not even in front of a crowd. It's an open mic, so you're sitting there in front of other comics. And Buddy Hackett's son, Sandy Hackett, once told me, if you want to make the other comics in the back of the room laugh while you're on stage, light yourself on fire. That's how supportive they're going to be towards your jokes. And so, you know, it sucks at first because you don't know how to do it. Everything, riding a bike, roller skating, you name it. You suck at it when you first start because you haven't learned anything. So if you can get through the sucking part, which takes a while, depending on how hard you work and how many times you can get up and practice, then you'll possibly be able to do this. But there's the other factor, which is you got to be funny too.
Well, I've always wanted to try it. When we used to do the live to tape shows at the Hard Rock
Yeah,
before COVID hit, we did a normal talk show monologue,
yeah,
which has since now morphed into more of a weekend update type of thing when we started doing the shows from home. But I've
right.
always kind of wanted to maybe at some point find an open mic and try to take maybe some of the evergreen material that I've used from some of the monologues and
I,
see if I could do it. But
I
uh,
think the best
Gary,
advice the best advice I can give somebody who's thinking of trying this is find an open mic, go to the open mic, and don't go up. Don't go up that first time. Just watch. Just get a feel for the comics that are going up, what they're going to be talking about, the kind of rhythm, the kind of cadence, because, look, it's not that they're doing it right. It's just something to kind of get you familiar with that world that you're about to enter in now. So, watching is a big thing in stand up that I want to say a lot of comics don't do. More comics now, the younger comics I see are watching, but it's important to watch the comics that are up there in front of you, and see what's working. Maybe you have a similar bit that they lost the room on. So you go, all right, well, that didn't work for him. I'm not going to try that. They clearly don't want to talk about that topic. If he's got some COVID jokes and they tighten up and you're like, okay, I got some COVID stuff, but if they're not giving him anything on that, I'm not going to, or you say, you know what, you take it as a challenge. You go, hey, his didn't work, but maybe mine will, everybody delivers it differently. It's a process that you have to, the way you write your first time is nowhere near the way you're going to write a year from now, 2 years from now, right? So it's constantly evolving. You're constantly learning, and just be prepared for it to suck and to bomb a lot. It's a whole new podcast I'm working on with a good friend of mine, James Mattern. He's a comedian. We started together in Vegas. He's one of the best hosts in New York City. He headlines as well, and he just put out an album that won album of the year. The Interrobang gave it album of the year. It's called The Check Spot. And I don't know if you're familiar with the check spot, but in the comedy clubs, when they have a showcase show, meaning 7, 8 different comics going up and doing 10 minutes, there's one comic that has to go up and do 5 minutes while the servers come around and put the checks on the table.
Mm.
And this is one of the worst spots in comedy because nobody's paying attention. Everybody's doing math, everybody's splitting stuff, people are signing stuff. So if you can get people to stop doing math and pick their head up and laugh, then you're doing something right. So his whole album is him doing various check spots. And James and I started a podcast going to be out this month called Thanks for Coming Out, which was a saying we used to have in Vegas when one of us would host and bomb and we'd bring the other one on stage. That was our code phrase to let the other guy know you're about to bomb too. This crowd sucks. So as we're shaking hands, we just go, thanks for coming out. And we would know that means you're about to eat this sandwich. And so we're doing a podcast where we interview other comics and just share, what we call war stories, our bombing stories, our nightmare gig stories. And it's a rite of passage. You have to go through that to become good at it.
I remember being in a comedy club where, and now that you mention it, I think it was around that time, and Colin Quinn was there. And one of the servers had long brown hair and a beard, and he was wearing, like white flowy clothes. And he walked in, and it was an immediate distraction as he was going to the different tables. As soon as he walks in, Colin Quinn goes, "Christ, party of 13, your table is ready."
And that's a pro, man. That's a pro.
It's like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
He's like, and I'm sure you're all going to want to sit on the same side of the table.
Yeah, right. He gave me great advice once on stage. I came off stage and I had an okay set, and he's just sitting there and he looks up and he goes, "You got to move around up there." And I'm like, "Oh yeah?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "You look like you know what you're doing when you're moving around up there." He goes, "You're just standing in one spot. It's like you're scared." And I never thought of it, and sure enough, you watch guys like Chris Rock, Kevin Hart, Sebastian Maniscalco, you watch these guys playing arenas, wherever it may be, man, they're moving constantly.
Even Eddie Murphy, Ron Delirious, they own the stage. It's their stage.
That's right. So yeah, little stuff like that, man, it goes a long way. And that's the coolest thing about this gig is you never stop learning. Right? You always pick something up, and it's those bad shows is where you learn the most, not the good ones.